Well, welcome everyone. I really appreciate that you had took the time to be on our Inner Circle call today. And this is a really special Inner Circle call because I have a guest with me. His name is Jim Aydelotte. And Jim is a coach and a trainer with me for lease options. And he has become quite an expert, I will say, in lease options over the last few years. He's done getting close to 100 deals of lease options. As a matter of fact, right before the call we were chatting, and he said he had done about 3, I believe, tied up 3 lease options this week, sold 2 last week. So we're definitely going to want to talk to Jim. Just so you know a little bit about his background, Jim is an engineer by degree, and that was his profession for many years until he got called into the ministry, and now he is a full-time pastor and a part-time investor. So Jim, I'm so glad that you could be on the call today with me.
Thanks, Wendy. It's great to be on the call. Looking forward to looking at some of the questions and really talking about this business because, as I've said to other people, and we talk about this in coaching, the one thing that people need to understand is anybody can do this business if they just stick with it. And it's a great opportunity. Today is the best time to get started in this business.
Absolutely, and anyone can do it, and that's, you know, you could be a full-time parent, you could be in a full-time position somewhere else. It's not a full-time position to be an investor unless you choose it to be, you know, and you can do this business part-time, and that's an awesome thing about it. So for those of you who've never been on one of the calls, one of the things you can do in the panel, you can type in some questions. There's a little question box, and Jim and I will be glad to answer those for you as we go along. So we did get sent some questions in via email that we're going to go through, and the two of us are going to answer those for you. And then we'll also answer any additional ones that you put into the question box. So I'm going to just go ahead and get started right away answering the questions that you all sent already. So the first question is, when do you tell the seller that you are an investor? And Jim, I'm gonna let you share most of the questions, and maybe I'll just pipe in because really I think everyone wants to hear a little bit about what you have to say, and I'm excited to hear some of the things you've been doing in the last couple of weeks. So go ahead and answer some of the questions if you don't mind. If you don't mind me putting you on the spot.
No problem. I'm happy to. Thanks, Wendy. I appreciate it. When do you tell the seller that you are an investor? I typically do not tell the seller I'm an investor. Let me just back that up a little bit, because when I'm talking to a seller, one of the fundamental things that I do in building the rapport with the seller and talking with them about their property and why they want to sell and so on and so forth, one of the things that I will segue into is the fact that I buy houses. And so without me telling them that I am an investor, I will say, Joe, just so you know, I buy properties. I buy, on average, 3 to 4 properties a month. And I buy them a couple different ways. And that's my segue. I don't use the word investor. It's not something that's in my vocabulary. I've learned just to, you know, be able to tell people what I do without having the whatever they think an investor is. That's the problem that I feel that people have. If someone says to me, "Are you an investor?" I will typically say, "Well, what do you mean by that? Do you mean do I buy properties? Do I hold properties? Do I rehab properties?" Because whatever their connotation of an investor is, when you answer that yes, that means they automatically pigeonhole you into whatever their concept of an investor is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
so I
a
always
really
like
good
to ask
point.
them what they mean by that. But I typically never have to tell any seller that I'm an investor. I simply say I buy homes, and I tell them how I buy homes and see if that's something that we can, you know, continue to do business on. So I really don't tell people that I'm an investor. I guess just plain and simple.
Yeah, and you know, Jim, I kind of agree with you. I think a lot of times, even the word real estate investor tends to have a negative connotation in the public's eyes. And when you say I'm a real estate investor, it can almost be like, oh, because you don't know how they're going to interpret that. You don't know what their perspective is on what's a real estate investor. Is it those slimy people they see on the news that come in and steal grandma's house from them, or and do something illegal and it's not legit? Or is it someone like what you and I do, which is going in and we buy houses, and that's what we do, and we help buyers and sellers, and that's really what we do. And so I like the way that you explain it. That's excellent. Okay, let me go to the next one. Okay, so this one is, this will be a good one for you too, because you've done quite a few of sandwich lease options lately, is how are you handling rent credits in regards to FHA and bank underwriters? I just closed on a sandwich lease, and the underwriters would not allow the rent credits as additional down payment. They had me reduce the selling price.
That's a great question, Sam, and quite frankly, that is really one of the ways to handle it. The thing that I've run into is no two underwriters are going to be the same. Every one of them is different. And my experience has been that typically on a sandwich lease, especially a sandwich lease that may have gone, 18, 24 months or something, many times we are redoing purchase and sale agreements and doing some updates on the paperwork because that's what the underwriter wants. So what you said here about the underwriter would not allow the rent credits as additional down payment, they had me reduce the selling price, that's a perfect way to handle it. The one thing to know is the next deal you do will likely be very different when it comes to the underwriter. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a really good point. And one of the other things that you can do is, let's say they said, you can't, use the rent credits towards your down payment. There are ways to still use that. Like maybe you can rewrite the contract to use the rent credits as part of their closing costs and fees, and you can do that with FHA. So the seller can contribute X dollars or up to like 3% or something, whatever the rules are at the moment. And you talk to I usually will talk to the mortgage broker and say, what is it? How do we need to write it to help the buyer? Because it's their client too. We just all want to follow the rules. And with those rules changing, it seems like almost every deal that I've done, when it comes to every one of them to be rewritten in some way, whether it be to reduce the price, whether it be to give them contributions, whether it be to give them an additional contribution because of something, maybe the appraisal or whatever. I mean, I don't know, Jim, are you seeing that too on some of your deals, that you do have to be flexible to rewrite those in some way?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, Wendy's probably, I'm guessing 2 or 3 years ago, one of the boot camps I attended, you actually had a slide that said, this is a clause that you can put in purchase and sale agreements. And the clause was simply that the seller would be willing and the tenant buyer would be willing to work together to redo any paperwork necessary to make the deal happen. And I actually incorporated that right into my purchase and sale agreements that I use. So if it's a link option,
because it's going to have to be something, Sorry, Jim, I just stepped on, I think, what you were saying at the end there.
Yeah, no, so that's one of the things that I incorporated, and I explain, if it's a co-op, link option, or assignment of contract, all synonymous terms there, I will sit down with the tenant buyer and the seller at the same table, if at all possible, so we can have a group discussion to make sure everyone understands kind of the process and explain to them what's going to happen as we get closer to getting them financed. And I let them know then and there. It's very possible we may have to rewrite this purchase and sale agreement. If so, I'll be here to help you with that. Not a problem. So
now you do. Let me explore that a little bit, Jim. You do that group setting more so when you're talking about a cooperative or flipping an option, right?
Correct.
Not a sandwich lease option.
Correct.
Okay.
That's right.
That way everyone understands too.
Only if they're local. Right now, most everybody's local, so.
Yeah, you're right, because sometimes it may be just a conversation that you need to have with the seller and the buyer to make sure they both understand, look, we're writing it this way right now. However, down the road things could change and you both may need to be flexible to rewrite something. If it gives you the same number or close to that same number, you might have to do that. So I always look at what's my bottom line. I mean, really, does it matter if I give someone rent credits or a credit off purchase price or, closing cost credits? It's all the same to me. If my bottom line's still the same, I just need to follow the rules and regulations of how to write it up. And that's, the deal, especially in the sandwich lease option. You want your sellers to also, if you're flipping the option, to understand that that might be important for them down the road, for them to do as well with the buyer.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
There was a question that popped up in the question box from Lowell, and I think it was a follow-up from that first question, and it said, when do you tell them you won't be living in the home? And I think pretty much right away when Jim and I speak with the sellers, they already know that we buy multiple homes, or there's other ways to tell them, but you pretty much tell them right away when you say I buy multiple homes, that's an indication right away you're not living in that home.
Exactly. In fact, I don't even think, probably in the last, I'm going to say in the last 3 years, I don't even think I've even had that question. Because when I segue into the fact that I buy properties, and on average I'm buying X number of properties per month, that question is automatically by default answered. So
yes. I mean, right away it tells them that you are an investor or you're not an owner-occupant, and it covers both of those questions and objections immediately. Okay. So here's a question: how do you manage the properties? And the second part of it was, if it's by a management company, what is the percentage they typically charge? And I can say that I think Jim and I both manage our own properties with a team member or staff member that helps us. So Jim, if you want to tie into that, go ahead.
Sure. If it's a management company if this is a sandwich lease option, and you're looking at having somebody manage that, you're probably going to eat up your monthly spread. So typically I don't have a management company handle those things for me. Those are all managed by myself. I take care of that all on my own, and so I don't have that issue. And I'm wondering if that's the root of the question. But if it's a rental unit, that's a separate question. And if it's a rental unit, I know that management companies range from anywhere from 15% to 25%. That's my experience. Although I don't do any rentals, so it varies based on location and really how hot the market is for rentals and what kind of management company it is. So if it's a rental situation, that might be a different question. Wendy, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so too. I think that, well, for me, I used to manage all of my own properties, and I'm pretty sure Jim probably started the same way. And then now I have an assistant who is basically my property manager, who does manage all of my properties. And I still help out. Once in a while I'll show a property. It's pretty rare now, but and I do also review the applications to make sure who I'm going to accept or reject on either lease options or on rental properties. I'm going to always take a once-over and do a once-over on each one of the people that are moving into my properties. And I used to own a management company, and if you hire a management company, typically it's going to be 8 to 10% per month of the amount of rent received, or the what we call gross rent received. And usually they'll charge a half a month or first month's rent every time there's a new tenant in there. So, for me, with as many properties as I own, it ends up being less expensive for me to have someone on my staff who is a part-time property manager who can also do other things for me, that's beyond just property management. Like I have my property manager help with some of my rehab stuff and goes and checks on other properties and does a little bit more than just a property manager would do. And I think yours does the same.
As far as property management?
Well, you don't have as much property management, right?
Right. I have zero property management. The sandwich lease options that I do have, I typically take care of all that on my own, but understand when it comes to property management, there really is no management other than I have to take the tenant buyer's check and if they send me a check or whatever, and either mail a check or make a deposit into the seller's account. As far as property, what I do is I have the tenant buyer manage the property. I require the tenant buyer to maintain the property. That's part of my contract with them. So I really don't have any kind of issues with having to take care of any maintenance or anything like that. In fact, this might help some of you because we've been battered with, rain at times, and over the years, there's been properties that have had sump pumps in them. So I began incorporating a phrase in our lease agreements that says that the tenant buyer is responsible to maintain the sump pump, and if power happens to go out, they are responsible for being sure that the sump pump can be adequately powered, and any water damage is their responsibility. And that's just an overview of what I say. So there are certain things that I put in there after some experience that, I require them to take care of all the maintenance on the properties because that's their responsibility.
Right, right. Okay, good. Okay, and I agree, because there's some clauses that we put in our contracts that really specify that the tenant buyer is responsible for all maintenance, that's where we're, when it comes to just lease options, that management portion is going to be really minimal. So you certainly don't want to pay someone to manage for you when you're using, my contracts, for instance, because it's just not going to be worth it. Now, there are times when something major will happen to a property, and like maybe a furnace will go out. You can't expect a tenant to fix an entire furnace. Now, most of the tenants do because they understand we have what I call, the serious talk in the very beginning when they move in, where I look them in the eye and say, now look, you're going to be a future homeowner. That's why you're responsible for maintenance. Now, if you ever have a problem and you can't fix something, I need you to make a call to me, but you're going to be owning this home. Isn't that right? And I have that real serious talk with them so that it really does minimize those maintenance type calls for you. All right, if the option fee is $5,000, what about your security deposit? And Jim, I'll ask you, do you charge a security deposit on top of an option fee?
Typically, no. I just put N/A, not applicable, in the security deposit line because if I'm getting a non-refundable option consideration fee of I don't have a security deposit. Now, that said, I will have a pet deposit if they do have pets, and my policy has been a $500 fee for pets. If they have 1 or 2 cats or 1 or 2 dogs or whatever, that actually goes to the price of the home should they exercise their option, or if they no longer have the pets and they prove that to me, they get that $500 back within, say, 30 days or something like that. If they decide to move out and there's some pet damage or something, I use that as part of the cleanup. They won't get that back.
Right.
So that's how I handle that portion of it. Now, if this is a co-op or link option, the $5,000, if that's all that I'm getting, depending on the price of the home, that may not leave the sellers with anything. One of the ways that I've been handling that with co-op or link or assignment of contract type of deals is when we go for our 3.5% or $5,000, whichever is greater, I will always try to get more down on the property. I will shoot for 5% down instead of 3.5% because I want my seller to have some upfront money as well. So one of the things that I've been doing is if I've got a $100,000 home, 3.5% or $5,000, whichever is greater, obviously that's going to be 5%, which is $5,000. I may push for an extra $1,000 or $1,500 on top of that. So I might shoot for a minimum of $600 or $6,500 so that the seller actually has that up front with the first month lease payment on a co-op option. Does that make sense? Because I don't want them left holding the just first month lease payments and not have anything else. So that's how I've been doing link options or co-op options. And There have been some times as well where I am moving a $200,000 or $250,000 home, and for us, by the way, where we're at, that's a very high-priced home. That is $250,000 is over 3 times, just over 3 times the median sales price for our county.
Not my county,
So,
Jim's county.
yeah, my county. I'm in the cornfields, as Wendy says. So I'm in a very rural area. In fact, so rural, I'll give you an example. There's only 16,500 single-family homes in my entire county. My county is 40 miles by 28, 30 miles wide. So, I mean, it's not a small county. So what I'll do on those bigger-priced homes, if I'm shooting for 5% down on a $250,000 home, that's $12,500. I will typically give them $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 of that, and I'll take my $7,000 or $8,000, whatever it is, whatever we agree up front on. I don't have to have the whole thing. I want the seller to be comfortable with me doing the deal with them, assisting them, bringing the qualified tenant buyer on a link option. So I'm willing to give them part of that money. So I'm not taking typically all of that 5%. So if it's 3.5% or $5,000, whichever is greater, you're looking at 3.5% of $100,000, $3,500. That's roughly about $8,000. I'll push for 5%, get 12 or 13,000 down. They get $4,000 or $5,000. I get my $7,000 or $8,000, and everybody's happy.
Yeah, very nice. And that's a really great way to look at it for a link option. That's awesome. And then also for, where Jim and I live only a county or two away from Jim, so we're not very far from each other, but our area traditionally is fairly typical. I'm going to call this a fair judicial system. Our judges are fairly fair. If you're doing the right thing as a landlord, you're going to be treated fair. Whereas some of you on the line might be, live in an area where it's extremely pro-tenant, and there may be even rules or regulations that some judges may want to see something in your security deposit area. So, you might want to put a little something in there, $100, $200, something that's refundable to that tenant should they not exercise that option. That might be, just some advice for, like, if you're in California or Massachusetts. Those are 2 states that are very, very pro-tenant. Really, east side and west side of the country tends to be a little bit more pro-tenant. So just consider that as, FYI. If you're in a certain state and you're on the call, you're welcome to type something in the question box, and I'll see if I do know anything about those states to see about security deposits. All right, what are the risks associated with lease options? What issues are the most common, would you say, Jim?
Probably the risks associated with the lease option, if it's, regardless of whether it's a sandwich lease option or a link option, you always run the risk of a tenant buyer not exercising their option, leaving the property. They could have some damage to the property. That's not typically very common for me. Very, very rarely do I have a tenant buyer leave that I have to really do anything to a property. So for me, that's not common, but that is a risk. The risk to me is if I've got a tenant buyer that's not making the monthly payment, when I do a contract with the seller where I'm willing to do a sandwich lease and the numbers are right for me to stay in the deal, my risk might be that I have to pay that monthly payment if that tenant buyer doesn't pay, or I have to evict them, or they leave until I find a new tenant buyer. We actually have that situation happening right now.
Yes.
We have a tenant buyer that just for some reason, they don't want to pay me. And so we've done what we need to do. We're moving forward with proceedings, but I've had to make that monthly payment for May. So that's a potential risk to me. That is part of doing business in my estimation, because if I'm going to take this house under a sandwich lease contract, whenever I start making the payment to the seller, I always let them know, and it's in the contract, that I will continue to make that payment month after month, as long as their contract is in effect. So if I've got a tenant buyer that, for whatever reason, flames out, I'm still making that payment, and I'll just put another tenant buyer in the property. That's probably, for a sandwich lease option, that's probably the biggest risk.
Yeah, I would agree. And if they do, and they do damage or something, and you've got to really think about this, is that is a risk on a sandwich lease option. But if you buy a home as a rental property, you've got the exact same risk, but even more so. You can't get out of that.
Mm-hmm.
But you would have that same issue if your tenant did damage, or you need to get rid of them, or they're not paying you. You'd still have a payment you need to make.
Right.
So it doesn't really. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. With that being said, though, if I'm getting a several $1,000 lease option consideration fee on the front end, it's always wise to take part of that income and put that into a savings account somewhere where you've got a buffer in case something like that happens. So if you get $5,000 down, and you probably don't want to just take all that and go party, but you probably want to put some of that into your account, because trying to build a business. So you're always going to have to account for some potential that could arise, and you want to be able to have funds where it's not coming out of your pocket, and you can make that payment for a month, maybe two, until you get another tenant buyer in there. You get another tenant buyer in there, now you've got another $5,000. So that's going to absorb some of what you had to pay, put some more in the bank account, spend the rest, or invest the rest in your business.
Yeah, I totally agree about saving for a rainy day fund and having some backup. It's so tempting that when you do get this business going and you get $5,000 down up front, to go below that instead of keeping it in savings for the what ifs. Because no matter what kind of property that you do, including options, even though you can truly do this business with no money or credit of your own, when you do get money, you should keep it so that you have that cushion, so that you're not up a creek with no paddle type of situation. You definitely want to do that. All right. How do you ensure that the seller closes on the property? Is the deed held in escrow? And I would say you can't ever make anyone close on a property unless it's court ordered, right? There is a possibility that a seller could say, I'm not going to sell to you at the end. But we do some things to really help secure and prevent that and secure your interest in the property. We file a memorandum of option, which clouds the title so they can't sell it to anyone else or refinance it without working through you. However, there are going to be, or there could be times that a seller would say, I'm refusing to sell to you. And especially, in a time where the market goes up significantly. That could be a situation that might arise for you. And we can't totally prevent that. That's also one of those risks that you're going to have in a lease option, because you don't own it and someone else does own it. There's a chance that they may make an issue out of it. Now, on the sandwich lease option end, if we flipped it to a buyer and a cooperative option, actually, both of them, our buyers are notified and it's in writing that they know, we can't guarantee anything about what the seller is or isn't going to do. We just can't control that. And that we would, their money would, well, if it's a co-op, it's turned between the two of them, we're out of the deal. But if it's a sandwich lease option, we're in the middle, our contracts state that we'll give them back their option fee plus $500 as full and complete liquidated damages if the seller, cannot transfer title for any reason or doesn't transfer title. You want to add anything to that, Jim, or?
No, other than this, if I've got a seller that is not willing to close, now technically what that means is they're not willing to produce marketable title. And so if they're not willing to close, I require that they refund the option consideration fee. That's not going to come out of my pocket.
Yeah, but you're going to have to still sue them for that, or for the the contract to close on that contract. I mean, you can sue for specific performance if it's worth it to do so, if the deal's really good. I mean, that is the next step. Very rare, guys. I want to complicate that this is a concern for a lot of my students, but I'm going to say it's very rare. As a matter of fact, I don't think I've ever had a situation where we couldn't work it out. I did have a seller once who was an attorney. This is why I won't buy from attorneys on an option anymore. Or I really won't. I mean, I'm joke about that at class sometimes, but I'm serious. That I had an attorney that was a seller once, and boy, her and her sister were attorneys, and we were ready to close on a sandwich lease option, and she just kind of made it difficult. And I ended up having to give her a little bit more to make the deal happen and to close that transaction, which was a real shame, but because of her legal abilities to drag it out, I took something rather than nothing on the deal. But otherwise, it's fairly rare. I mean, Jim, have you seen this much at all, or maybe once?
I have never, ever had a seller refuse to close at all. The whole program, when I'm talking with a seller, is geared to liquidating their property as quickly as possible. And really, that's even on a sandwich lease. My goal is to get that property cashed out, do everything I can in my power, the things that I can control, to get that deal done. Even on a link or co-op option, quite frankly, I will stay in the fray. I will talk to the seller. I'll stay in touch with the tenant buyer. I just talked to a tenant buyer that's been in a property now since beginning of January. Just follow it up and say, hey, how's it going? How's things? How do you guys like the house? You know, how's things? How are things moving along? And just to keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on with some of these folks. And it might just be a 30-second courtesy call. And I want them to know if there's ever an issue, be sure to give me a call, let me know. So even on a link or co-op, I'll still get back into the fray if I have to help them out. In fact, I'll even tell a seller, hey, if this couple don't make it and they end up leaving, just let me know. I'll go ahead and get another tenant buyer, and they're at no cost to you.
Yeah, yeah,
So
and
I will do that.
that's a great way to look at it too. And I think that the biggest thing is, and it goes back to what Jim was kind of saying, is that you're only buying from motivated sellers. They want you guys to buy their home. They want to sell. They don't want that home. They're not, they're not typically investors, although I have bought some from investors in the past. Usually they're investors that aren't doing very well as investors, which is why they're a motivated seller. But they don't want that home. They are wanting me to close as much as I'm wanting to close. They may even call me, hey, Wendy, how's it going? Hey, can you close early? How's it going? I mean, we're in touch with each other. We have a relationship to communicate, and that's really key to all this. As Jim's talking about, he might communicate with the buyer, tenant buyer, in a co-op option. It's really important. Communication is so key to removing the potential of a problem that might arise down the road. That's usually what happens is if people don't communicate, that's when things can be misunderstood and turn into legal battles or something negative. So that's something I would just say is this is very, very, very rare, whoever asked this question, but we do want to say that, it is a potential. That is actually it's a risk, but very rare. I mean, for both of us, especially if you're following the way that we teach in our boot camp, is you're going to have it's going to be very, very rare when you do this. Okay. How about the deed? Do you ever hold that in escrow, Jim, for the seller?
No, never. I don't see that
yeah,
as a necessary thing at this point. Never had to, face that. In fact, early on, I'll be honest, I didn't even do memorandum of options because I didn't know about them. In fact, many of the sandwich leases that we still have today, I don't have a memorandum of option filed. I have at this point, I can honestly say I have such a good rapport with the sellers that, they're still looking for me to move their property. They're very happy that I've been paying them faithfully every month. In fact, I even will do this. We talked about one of the risks, just to kind of recap on that. If I've got a tenant buyer that is getting ready, or I know is stopped paying me, or I have to take action, or they move, I always, 100% of the time, out of courtesy, will notify the seller that, hey, this couple, something happened, he lost their job, they're getting divorced, whatever the situation might be. I don't want to, I won't, you know, I don't want to gossip about their life, but I'll say, I just want you to know that while I'm getting another qualified tenant buyer in there, I'll be taking care of the property. Any issues that come up, don't worry about a thing. They're handled.
Right.
And I'll keep making the payment. So, and they very much appreciate that. They very much like that. Do they want their house gone? Yeah, they want their house gone. But I still, out of courtesy, will tell them that. You know why? Because ultimately, you know what happens is a neighbor who knows the owners will see the people packing up, and they'll call them. So I always want to try to be the first one to notify them so there's no surprises.
Right. Right. Communication is so key in this business. I mean, it really is. And it just keeps everybody feeling good about the deal, and it really helps make it move smoothly. Plus the fact that, you know, if you've been that upright and upfront with them and straightforward, if there ever is a glitch down the road and you need maybe more time or you need to work something out with them, gosh, they're so easy to work with when you have that rapport relationship with them. I've rarely ever had a seller, unless they absolutely couldn't, extend for me at the end if I needed it or asked for it. Because, not that they want to, but because they're willing to, because of that relationship that's in place. Since you were not on the title until closing, are there seasoning issues with tenant buyer's lender? Do you want to answer that one, Jim? What you found?
No, there's not really a seasoning issue with the tenant buyer's lender, because regardless of whether it's a link option or a sandwich lease option, there has not been a transaction taken until closing. Typically, these tenant buyers are taking, on average, 18 months to get qualified, some more, some less. So there's no real seasoning issue with them being on contract. If they're qualified, they're qualified. If it takes 3 months, 3 months, if they can get financed in 3 months, then everybody's happy. I have not seen any kind of seasoning issue with a tenant buyer's lender. I have seen seasoning issues with a seller who is trying to get a mortgage after leasing their property. And many times a bank will want to, they'll want to see a copy of the lease. They want to know how many months it's been quote unquote rented. And I've had a couple of sellers say, hey, this is going to take us, you know, we can't really get our property until, you know, for 12 months. We're told we have to have the house under contract for 12 months before we can get another mortgage. Personally, that's not an issue for me, and I don't make it an issue for them. Here's what I do. I say, well, here's the name and number of 2 of the mortgage brokers I use. They can probably get you financed pretty quick. They call them, and those sellers are able to get financed without any kind of seasoning issues whatsoever. We have a property that the sellers had us lease. Within probably 45 days, they went to try to get finance, and they couldn't get finance. I put them in contact with one of our mortgage brokers, and they were immediately approved, and the underwriters moved forward, and they got their loan, they got their condo, everybody was happy. So.
Yeah. Perfect, perfect. There's always, I'm going to go back to it, there's always ways to work things out. If you ever get into a bind, you're at the end of a sandwich lease option, don't wait till the last day before, of course. But as you're getting closer and you know that buyer's ready to apply for their mortgage, and you feel like, you know, there's going to be maybe a seasoning issue, or there could be something in a mortgage regulation at the time, you know, you can always call me and we'll help you figure out a solution, because there's almost always a solution when you start looking for it. There's, or sometimes most of the time, multiple solutions to a situation. Okay, so how would you negotiate this deal? Seller inherited a single-family home. It's a 4-bedroom, 2-bath, asking 119. The after repair value is 215, and the rehab is 65,000. And by the way, these aren't always going to be lease option deals, Jim, just so you're aware. But Jim and I both
Sure.
do. We also do rehabs on top of lease options, so this might be a perfect question for that. So let's see. It's asking 119. They're asking 119, 65 on top of that. You're in at 184. And the after repair value is 215, plus you probably got carrying cost, commissions, that type of thing. How would you negotiate this type of deal? I mean, for me, I would probably need to get it for less than 119 or a little bit, maybe 110 even. I might do it for, or 105.
Yeah, for me, I can tell you I wouldn't pay a dime more than about 90. That's pushing it for me, because if I take 215, my formula is times 0.7 minus repairs, I'm at 85.5. If you really are looking at, now, there's a couple of factors that we need to add in on this. First and foremost is this: is this an appreciating market? If you've got double-digit appreciation in your market, this might be a great deal. If you are doing your very first rehab, this is probably not the deal for you.
Yes,
if this is a sandwich lease option, you probably don't want to do this deal as a sandwich lease option, because it's too much work for the tenant buyer to get up to snuff on. However, I have done some deals on options where I've taken properties that needed work, bought them on contract for a discount, flipped them to a tenant buyer on discount, and the tenant buyer, we listed the things the tenant buyer is responsible to do to update or upgrade or repair or fix or, finish prior to getting a mortgage, because they wouldn't qualify for a mortgage if those things aren't done. And I have structured some deals like that. It's kind of the sweat equity program, and I have put some together like that. So if this is an option deal, I would be very, very cautious based on the amount of rehab, to do this deal. This is a potentially risky deal for not just the seller, but really for the tenant buyer, who may not be able to, the right tenant buyer may not be able to do the work necessary or fund the rehab. The second thing that I would say is, if it is a rehab only, again, you're paying too much for the asking price. Now, again, that's asking price.
Yeah.
You don't have to offer them that. If this is an appreciating market, well, you might not want to pay more than $100,000. But me, I'm going to be in that $85,000 to $90,000 range before I would jump into this rehab.
Yeah. Well, and that might be also too, for me, I don't use the same formula, which maybe I should have some kind of exact formula like that. For me, if I can make, 40, 50 grand on a deal, I will do it. And my market's so hot right now that I'm assuming it's truly worth 215. And of course, I'm a broker, so I don't have to pay the full commission. So that's going to save me another 6 grand over, at least 3% off the deal. And I'm going to, and I know we have bidding wars where I am right now. So, I'm probably going to be a little bit more aggressive right now, Jim, than I would have been, a few years back when the market had tanked. It might be a little bit different.
Yeah, exactly right. And if you're looking at this deal, let's say you did have to pay, let's say you did end up paying 110 and you put 65 into it, you're into it for $75,000. You're still looking, at a $40,000 profit. Personally, if I'm using private money, I want more of a spread. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
But
yeah, that's a good point. Yes.
In my market, and this is my market, as Wendy pointed out earlier, we're 2 counties away. I have a completely different market. We are in a relatively flat market. Very little appreciation is taking place. The only reason that prices are ticking up slightly is because of a lack of inventory in our county. So it's a supply and demand issue.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to take that into consideration as well, so for what it's worth.
Good point. Yep. Okay, do you pay the realtor any portion of your option fee towards their commission up front, or do they get paid when the option is exercised? And do you want me to answer that one, Jim? I don't know if you work with real estate agents that often on options.
Nope, go ahead.
Okay. On that one, if it's a buyer's market, then I'll pay the agent up to 1% of the total purchase price towards their commission. The rest gets paid at closing. If it's a seller's market, I'll pay them up to 3%, assuming their part was going to be 3%. If it's really hot like it is now and everything is selling, then I might pay up to 3%. Same thing as in the early 90s when I first started buying from real estate agents. Right now things are hot. So it's a little bit different than, 4 or 5 years ago when things were not, and I would pay maximum 1%. And if it was really a situation where the agent was very distressed and came to me and approached me, and they just begged me to help their client. There were times too when the thing was really hot, when I wouldn't even pay 1%. I would pay maybe a half month's rent or something, the commission that agent was going to receive on just the rental portion, and then they would still get their commission upon closing for the full amount. So it just kind of depends on the situation. I kind of look at each deal, but in general, 1% to 3% for me, depending on the market. Are there differences in equity requirements for cooperative lease options, sandwich lease options, and subject to agreements? I'll say yes, definitely. And, Jim, if you want to answer to those, that'd be fine.
Sure. I have a general rule of thumb that if I'm looking at the equity requirements for a deal, for a sandwich lease option, and I'm going to start with a sandwich lease option, there has to be either 15% or $20,000, whichever is greater in the deal, for me to do a sandwich lease. For example, a $100,000 property. If there's not a minimum of $15,000 or 15% or whatever is greater, 15% or 20 grand, whichever is greater, I typically will not do a sandwich lease option. That's just my general rule of thumb. Have I done them in the past when there was less equity? Yes, but after being involved in the process and maturing in the business a little bit, I won't do a sandwich lease option unless those numbers are available. Now that said, it's very, very common for me to then move that seller, in my mind's eye, from possibly doing a sandwich lease option to doing a cooperative lease option or link option. And here's why. I really don't care if there is any equity in the deal for me to do a link option. If the house is $100,000 ARV and they owe $99,000, I can still do a link option. I'll mark the property up $5,000 or so, put my fee on top, and I might advertise that property for $1,049, $1,079. Go ahead and get my $5,000, get a tenant buyer in there. By the time the tenant buyer is prepared to qualify for a mortgage, the seller has paid their mortgage down a little bit, and they shouldn't have to bring money to the closing table. In fact, let me just say this. I have actually structured some deals recently on cooperative link options, or cooperative lease options rather, where we put a clause in the tenant buyer's option agreement that specifically states they cannot exercise their option for a minimum of 12 months. The reason we did that is so that the seller can pay down their mortgage so they don't have to bring money to the closing table. And that is one way to do it. And if it's really close, I think it's a safe bet. We have this conversation, by the way, with the tenant buyer. Just so you know, Joe and Sally, the option agreement specifically says you cannot exercise your option for a minimum of 12 months. Is that going to be a problem? So we let them know it's going to take this long for them to be on contract before they can exercise the option.
Yes, that's a really good point. Mm-hmm.
Subject to agreements, I am very, very particular when it comes to the subject to agreements. I don't do very many of them. However, they have to fall under similar guidelines of the formula I used for the rehab. A $100,000 property that's the ARV, if I can't get it for 70% of that minus repairs, I won't do it. I just won't do it. And I just to set the record straight, I'm not doing any short sale work right now. So I will, if it's a subject to deal, and I've made some offers recently on some subject to deals, it still has to fall within that category. So I will actually look at the property. If it's worth $100,000 and it needs $10,000 in work, and they're willing to keep me the house, and I can do that for $60,000, I'll do it. So I put that into the same category of formulation for the rehab work. That's how I do it.
Right, that's excellent. And what I look for on the sub two, I agree with everything Jim says. The only thing on mine is because my property values are a little bit more than Jim, as he described earlier. On the sandwich lease option, I want at least 40 grand to do one. Otherwise, I don't really want to stay in the middle of that deal. I'd rather just take my 3 to 5% on a co-op and flip it and be done with it. I don't want that risk of that in between and the tenant payments in and out, and what if they don't pay, and so I want a bigger chunk on it. As far as the subject twos, right now, I mean, this is just where I'm starting to think in today's market where things are warm, they're really hot. If I could find a subject two that didn't even have a lot of equity, but the interest rate was locked in at something very low, somewhere between maybe 2 to 4%, and the payment was really great, I might consider doing more of the subject twos right now with those types of arrangements. Although, Jim, I mean, I say this because I'm not out searching for those, but I can see that if those were brought to me, or if I ran across one, I might consider doing those if the cash flow was really pretty good because of that low interest rate. I might consider that, especially, or if it was a short term, like let's say there was only 10 years or 7 years left on a 15-year amortization, and it's still cash flowed with that kind of payment. There's a lot going towards equity each month. I would consider doing some subject twos with that, but I haven't done a whole lot of them lately either, just because I've been so busy doing a lot of rehabs and buying holds right now because of the way our market had gone down so much. All right. Do you remain in touch with the tenant once they are moved in? I'm going to say yes, I definitely do. Yeah, and even if it's a co-op, I think you mentioned that you do also.
Absolutely.
Okay, regarding flexible down payments, and I'm going to change that word to option fee, because the down payment's more of a mortgage and it sounds like financing terms. We have to be really, really cautious on that. So the option fee, which is what the tenant buyer puts down, a fee is non-refundable, whereas a deposit can be considered refundable, or a down payment can be considered like an earnest deposit, so you have to be cautious on that. So would the tenant buyer's option be void had they not followed through with the monthly payment? Would the tenant buyer's option be void maybe if they had not followed through the monthly payment? It can be, depends on your option agreement. Ours definitely, could be called void, but if they made it up and they just got behind, they paid late fees and didn't get evicted, I probably wouldn't void it, but I do have in my option agreement that I have the right to go to a month-to-month rental agreement should their should their rent ever be late, more than 10 days even. You want to say anything on that one, Jim?
Yeah, it really depends on the situation. If this is first and foremost, if this is essentially they're paying me, and so I'm going to be very, very more of the fact that they may be paying me late, or there may be an issue. I like my tenant buyers to know that if you run into a situation, your best bet is to call me before the due date, so that we know. and we can be sure that we're on the same page. I'm happy to work with somebody if they have a situation and it arises and they talk to me.
Right.
Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen either. In fact, the situation that I've in the process of moving forward with eviction on a tenant buyer right now,
Mm-hmm.
they just refuse to talk to me. And, so after some months of constantly chasing them and trying to make things right, the contract expired. And I gave them a 30-day notice to quit. So they decided, we're not paying you for that last month. And there's been no movement from them. So that's going to happen. So in this case, it is, I will say it this way, it's subjective. On a sandwich lease, it's subjective. If you got a good tenant buyer and there's a situation and they're communicating with you, you may just want to work that out. I wouldn't have a problem with that. If this is a chronic thing, that could be a separate issue. So you might have to just take that case by case. But the goal is, obviously, is to show that they make their payments on time. When they get ready to get financed, the underwriter, the mortgage company, is going to want to see that they've made their payments and they've made it on time. I've been asked for a ledger from underwriters. What I do is I photocopy every payment I receive with the envelope that it comes in on, showing the postmark date. And that's my proof to a mortgager that is looking for that information. The issue is they also want to see that money coming out of the tenant buyer's account. So the tenant buyer will be required to show that those checks are cleared every month and in a systematic way. And the tenant buyers know, because it's in my contract, and I put this in what I call a cover your assets letter. They know up front that it is possibly harmful for them if they make late payments, if they're not paying on time. This could adversely affect their chances of getting a mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
So I let them know that right up front. One of the big things that I have in my discussion with tenant buyers is it is extremely important that you do not pay late, that you pay on time. So I can show the mortgage company that you've made these payments on time, so there are no issues. And I had that conversation with them.
Very good, yeah. Okay, so the next question is, are you out of luck if the tenant buyer doesn't send the payment to escrow? This, I'm not sure what this, I don't know that Jim uses escrow either, but you can hire a third-party company where the tenant buyer could send money to an escrow company, and then that escrow company would pay the mortgage and then pay the seller if there's a difference. I do not use a third party. I don't think that Jim does either, but there are some people that do, and it's a fine option if that makes you feel more comfortable, but there is an expense to use an escrow company, and someone's going to pay that. Either you or the seller are going to pay it, and I personally would rather take that monthly amount and use that as cash flow in my pocket. But if they don't pay it, are you out of luck? Well, you just need to start eviction on anyone who doesn't pay at all, like Jim was just stating. Are your option contracts assignable for the tenant buyer? Assignable for the tenant buyer. Assignable. They're assignable to a tenant buyer if it's a cooperative. My seller knows I'm going to assign it. Are they assignable for the tenant buyer if you have a sandwich lease option? Mine are not assignable. Jim, how about yours?
No. The tenant buyer cannot assign their interest in the property at all, either on a link option or on a sandwich lease option.
Right. Right. Okay. And we've got just a couple more questions that had come in. If you've got any more, you can type them in. And then otherwise, I want to ask Jim about some of his deals that he did this week, because we're going to go over just a little bit over our normal time frame, because Jim's on the call just to share a couple of his deals and things that he's done in the last few weeks. How do you explain to the seller that your services are done once you place a tenant buyer and you are not a consultant or a management company? Jim, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. I don't really get that question, because what I do is I always try to eliminate the objection for a seller before they ask the question. My conversation with the seller in a co-op option where this might apply to will be this. We will be bringing a near qualified tenant buyer, and you will ultimately approve them. However, if anything happens in the future where you're having difficulties with them paying on time, or they end up leaving and you've got to get another tenant buyer, or do something with the property, please let me know. I'll be happy to help you. Just by me saying that eliminates an objection that I am not necessarily a management company, or my services are done, but I'm willing out of courtesy to help you in the future. And that might be a better way for me to say that. So if you do run into any issues, please let me know. I'm more than happy to help you in the future if something comes up. I will also tell the seller, just so you know, I'll from time to time be in touch with the tenant buyer just to see how things are going on their end as well. And I think that's just, I think that's an integral part of the business anyway. So.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, good. When you match a buyer to a seller, how do you know the seller's title is clear? You can either do the pre-title work yourself. You can go to the county building and check the title work. You can have a title company run it. You can look on public records that will assist you. You know, what do you use? Jim, I work with a title company, so I kind of have a little unfair edge for them to do pre-title work for me at no charge. So what would you recommend on that?
Right. I've actually, in the past, I've used a title company. It's really a minimal fee. It's like $75, and if that's a necessary thing, it's just part of the business. I'm in the process of trying to figure out a way to train my assistant to go to the courthouse in order to do that, and I'd rather pay her $50 instead of pay a title company $75. And she lives 3 blocks from the courthouse, so if I can get that all put in place here relatively soon, I will probably have her do that and just check the public records herself.
Excellent. Okay, good. On your lease option deals, when you are buying, do you usually get 100% credit, or is it more common to get 20 to 50% credit? So when you're buying, I mean, sometimes I get 100% credit. I would say it's more likely to get, 20% or 25% credit. How about you, Jim? Do you get any credit?
I do. I don't usually get 100% credit. I will say this. The only time that you can work out probably a 100% credit deal, at least in my estimation, is if you do a straight owner financing kind of arrangement where you agree to pay the property off in a certain time frame. Here, on a lease option deal, you're more likely to get, if on a sandwich lease, I typically will get in that 35% range. I'll get a third typically. That's very common for me. Very rarely do I get a half, but I will always get at least 25% rent credit all the time.
Okay,
so
very good. Quite a bit. Okay. And I'm assuming that's when you're buying, right?
That's when I'm buying.
Yeah. Okay. By the way, when you're selling right now, just I want to go back on that a little bit. We talked about this, I think, recently with the Dodd-Frank Act. You do have to be careful with giving rent credits now with the lease options. And I don't know, Jim, if you want to state anything about that, but I think you have to be really cautious, and it's probably safer not to give any rent credits at all when you're selling.
Yeah, I'm beginning to gravitate towards that more and more. It's just going to be an upfront option consideration fee.
Yeah.
Especially if I stay in the deal. I don't think it's going to be as big of an issue. At least I don't see it being as big of an issue if a seller and a tenant buyer are going to be working together in a cooperative lease option. That may not be as how do I want to say it, attractive to somebody that's looking for that. For us who are doing these deals on a regular basis, we probably don't want to do that if we're doing sandwich lease deals. So
Yeah,
I'm going to be getting away from giving them any rent credits at all.
Right. you lease option homes that need work or aren't very attractive or in bad areas? I don't in bad areas. I don't buy any house in bad areas myself. I have bought properties on lease options that do need work and aren't very attractive, in which case I usually offer them as a handyman special to a tenant buyer. But for the most part, I'm going to say that for my recommendation to most people, especially if you're starting out, that I'd be cautious on that, because if you don't have the money to fix it up if you ever needed to, you might be stuck with a property that needs rehab. So you definitely would want to use Jim's formula and make sure you have some type of equity in those properties if you're going to do something like that, just in case you need to rehab it or flip it or make some money on it. Jim, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't buy in bad areas no matter what kind of deal it is. I typically will not do very unattractive homes for options as well. My philosophy on options are nice homes in nice areas that don't need a lot of work. And then second to that, if you do let's just say you do a sandwich lease option on a property that needs work, I teach that you never put money in a home that you don't take title to.
Right.
Unless you have that in writing up front, I just don't do it.
Yeah, so I'm going to say it would be a very rare case. I'm going to say that it's definitely not for the newbie. You never want to put property on. There are a buyer who may be interested in putting some money in them. You do have to be more cautious with this technique, so I'm going to state that right up front also. The only one I've really put a lot of money into, Jim, was a few years ago. I knew the one, I had a real rapport with this person, and it was a short-term deal where I was fixing it up to flip it. And so it was a little bit of a different, unique twist to it, but not something that you would normally probably get involved in. Do you agree? I mean,
yeah, I agree, and especially if you are starting out, the last thing you want to do is put money into a property that you may not have or you may not ever recoup. So make sure you're aware of that and be smart.
It would only, like, you know, I have one right now where I've probably done that, but I'm a seller if I'm going to do a land back when I buy it instead. That way I own it, and I'm going to do that one in my IRA, so it'll be a little bit easier. Okay. On sandwich lease option, on a sandwich lease option, I don't allow it. They're not, that's part of my contract. They just aren't allowed to talk to them. How about you?
Yeah, I'm the same way. To me, that's a recipe for disaster. And I tell the seller, here's how I handle it. Here's how I deal with the seller. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, my contract is with you. I am the person that is buying the house from you, so everything that needs to be communicated, you communicate with me. My contract with my tenant buyer is separate. My goal is to get your house clear, cashed out as quickly as possible, and if that means I have to get another tenant buyer in after them, I'm still making your payments and guaranteeing the maintenance on the property. You will see that as a seamless thing. But my contract says they cannot do that. So if they insist and they push and they want to make that an issue, I let them know that then, we may not be able to do business together.
Yeah, that means they might not be right, person to, or they may not be the right seller to work with me, or they just are not motivated enough, because if they don't trust me enough to deal directly with them and I'm their tenant, I'm not going to be the resident, but I'm their tenant, then it's probably just not a win-win. So I'm going to probably pass on that deal also. Oh, I do want to mention that I have a boot camp coming up, and then Jim, I do want to have you chat a little bit about some of your deals. But if you're not registered, you can go to wendypatton.com/bootcamp. And actually, because you're an inner circle and you're on this call today, if you type the promo code CIRCLE when you are there, because you've watched this, I'm going to give you $100 off your ticket price. Now, if you already have tickets to my boot camp because you own my arsenal, don't go pay for them again, okay? You just need to go and register, and you would have been notified that you're eligible for those tickets. All right, you can, let's see. Also, oh, this is just for those of you that are on the call too, if you want to stay an extra day, I don't know if I'll do this every time on a boot camp, but this time I'm going to be offering an investment property tour. I don't know if Jim will be attending that day or not, or if he can even do so, but you can go to investingtours.com and that will tell you a little bit about that event. Here's a couple of I'm going to share with you, Jim, I'm going to share your testimonial about my last boot camp, if you don't mind. Hopefully this will play so you guys can hear a little bit about the boot camp. Let me say.
My name is Jim Aydelotte, and about 3.5 years ago I attended Wendy Patton's boot camp for the very first time. I keep coming back for a lot of reasons, because training is spread. And when we got back from our first boot camp, we did 6 deals in 6 weeks. Since that time, we've developed a $4 million portfolio, and we have about 6-figure income in just our monthly payments from the properties that we own or control. I'm going to tell you, if you're looking at getting involved in the real estate investment business, you want to come to Wendy's boot camp. It's the best out there, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. And in addition to that, I'm actually now helping Wendy teach that boot camp, and it's a great time. We'll look forward to seeing you at the next one.
Awesome. See, that's pretty cool, isn't it? All right, let me just get back to my, okay. And so that's it. But thanks for watching. And Jim, I wanted to see, let me see, there's a question on this. Let me just see. Oh, good. Okay, that was just Ryan type it in the end. Okay, great. So tell us a little bit about, you just sold a couple deals last week. You picked up 3 link options, or what we call cooperative options, this week. Jim, do you mind sharing a little bit about how you bought those deals and how you found them?
Sure. Those actually are deals that were all referrals. In this case, we had somebody contact us. They knew that we have helped somebody else that they knew liquidate their property or get a tenant buyer on their property or buy their property. So they contacted me and wanted to see if we could help them. So the 3 deals that we picked up this week, in fact, I saw both owners last night, and one owner owns 2 houses, another owner owns 1, so those are the 3 deals. Let me give you a little idea of those deals. They're all going to be link options. One house is a $250,000 property in a very nice area in central Michigan, and it is it's rented right now. So they're actually wanting me to transition that into a tenant buyer with them getting to the point where they can lease to own it. They own the house that they live in free and clear, very nice house, and they're going to be moving to a condo in Grand Rapids, so they want to get out of that. And I did some comps, gave them some information, and we have a deal on that property. And then the other people have a rental, and it's a small house. This is a property that's a little 2-bed, 1-bath, but it's 4.5 acres out in the country, and people love that. So we put that under contract, and that's a 3.5% or $5,000, whichever is greater. And just in the last 36 hours, we've had over 20 phone calls on that house, and that came only from putting signs in the yard. It's a heavily trafficked area, and we already have 2 people that want to see it and qualify, and that's in 36 hours. So that one will probably go pretty quickly.
Wow, that's
those
awesome.
are the 3 we did this week. We just liquidated 2 properties this week. In fact, I just had a phone call from my assistant. We moved a property that I've never seen, I've never been to. She actually brought the seller. I signed the contract with the seller. She showed the properties, found a qualified tenant buyer, got the applications filled out, collected the application fee of $1,000 earnest money deposit, and gave them to me today on that deal. And we will process that. We will process that. If this tenant buyer looks good, we'll go ahead and present the information to the seller. We'll get that one cashed out. And we just got another one that we moved on 16 acres, real nice property, custom-built home. It's only about a 12-year-old property. It's in the $240,000 range. We've got somebody that's got the full 5% down, and the monthly lease payment of, I think it's $15.75 a month. It's a beautiful home, and it's got a 40 by 60 pole barn with heated and cooled insulated workshop inside. That property, that'll be gone. So we're looking at probably moving 3 or 4 properties before the middle of June. So we'll have those gone. And those are very typical deals for us. We are doing, we are converting a lot of people that are linked options. These people don't have equity in the home, or they're at the point where they just can't afford to cash out right now, or something like that. So these are very typical deals for us. 2 of these houses, but you have to remember, 2 of these houses, they own them free and clear. They're not in a hurry to do anything. If we get a tenant buyer and they've got the down payment, they're more than willing to cash flow these properties as linked options by us helping them. So we're doing Jim, those on a regular basis.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to say, because you are doing quite a few of these. I mean, sometimes you pick up 2 or 3 a week, certainly 2 or 3 a month. You know, someone who's contemplating, geez, do I go to Wendy's boot camp or not? Why would you say that they should be there? I mean, you know, it's easy for me to say, oh yeah, this is easy to do, but you literally are doing this, and you are in a rural area. Everyone, I do tease Jim about living in the cornfields, but it's true. You don't have to be in a big, huge city. He doesn't have the same ability to buy as many properties as I can buy in Metro Detroit, not even close. And yet, you know, 6-figure income a year and doing, you know, probably 30 to 50 deals a year. I mean, that's quite a bit. And holding a $4 million portfolio already at this time, and really his property values are less than mine. So how likely is it someone can actually do this in their market?
Well, let me just say that we weren't even doing cooperative lease options until we attended the last boot camp in, what was it, September in Detroit. We, just as a matter of practice, for some reason, we just weren't doing them. We were pursuing sandwich lease options, and I knew about the cooperative options from previous boot camps. But what happened is, at this boot camp, it was one of those things where it just struck me that I am leaving money on the table if I don't do a sandwich lease option. And I didn't want to do that. And so it became a very, very good fit for us, of course, to take some of those leads that we were processing anyway and turn them into a deal where we could do a cooperative lease option. That boot camp, now I have been to more than one boot camp. I go to every boot camp Wendy does. And I have gone to every boot camp Wendy does from the first time I was introduced to her boot camp and her teaching. And I'll tell you why, because every time I go, there's always something new that I'm learning. There's always something new that I'm picking up. And that is so important. The continuing education as this is a dynamic business. Things are constantly evolving. Things are constantly changing. And in order for me to stay on top of the things, I'm constantly networking with people that know a lot more than me. That's probably the biggest reason why I go. Secondly, if you're new, you want to be at these boot camps because you're going to pick up that one thing that's going to propel you and catapult you into being successful in this business. And that's what it's going to take. I don't know what that is for you. It could be a marketing strategy. It could be it knows what it is. It could be listening to live calls while we do lulls in class and we talk to someone in class. You might sit there and I've got a piece of the puzzle. Now I'm ready to do this, and that's why you need to be there. It's very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean but don't underestimate too that Jim is such because he's become such a student of learning something new all the time. He is a phenomenal teacher at that because he's really internalized so many different things he's learned, and because of that, I think, Jim, you've been able to share that and teach others. I mean, you really now, you know, we've done several boot camps together, and you're permanent part of those boot camps now, as long as you want to do them. And I think that people are learning so much from how you're implementing, you know, these strategies. So that's really important.
And not only that, folks, it's a great time. It really is. It's a lot of fun. And Wendy's a great teacher too, and Keith and Shannon are great teachers. You have in 3 days everything you need to know to go out and make stuff happen. To go on and just take this thing and move it forward. And literally, you're 30 days away from putting an extra $5 grand in your pocket, and everything you need to know is done and taught right there in that course. So
Absolutely.
very important, and I can't underestimate that. And if you just continue to learn and listen and learn and apply, listen, learn, apply, you have to know something. I say this all the time. I knew nothing about real estate when I got started. Literally nothing. I could build a house from the ground up. I can do electrical, plumbing, HVAC. I knew all that. I knew nothing about real estate. And it took me some time, and I stayed focused, and I wanted to learn because I was so hungry to change. I was so sick and tired of being sick and tired of the rat race. I needed something different. That was before my call to ministry. But after the call to ministry, after leaving the engineering world, I really needed something to supplement our income. Nothing else beats this. Hands down, nothing else. I'll put this business up against any other business model. Because where are you going to turn around and make a profit of $5,000 for no investment in 30 days? You can't do it anywhere. No traditional business can offer that. You'll be in debt for years. No brick and mortar idea. You won't make anything close to that doing garage sales or clipping coupons. This is the kind of business that can make your financial future real and can make a real kind of change in your life. And I know that everyone can do it.
Absolutely. Well, Jim, thank you so much for being on the call today, too. And everyone, thank you so much for being on the call, and we look forward to seeing you or talking to you next month. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.